Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first lecture about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. This is our last week of lectures, so there will be two of them about to play this week, as you know, according to the syllabus. I required that you read the 1974 version for a couple of reasons. First of all, Tennessee Williams, when he first wrote the play Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and it was being workshop meaning that it was cast, there was a director, there were designers, and they were performing in different theaters around the country before moving to Broadway. It's 1954 at this time. They were working on the first version of the play. And Elia Kazan, who was the director, Elia Kazan is both a Broadway director, was both a Broadway director as well as a Hollywood film director, told Williams that the ending he had written in Act Three would never be acceptable in by the public or by critics based upon how he had brought the play to a conclusion. Kazan thought that society was not ready for the type of conclusion to the play that Williams initially wrote. So, using suggestions from Kazan, Williams then rewrote Act 3, which is what eventually was produced on Broadway and was the basis for the film that starred Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor. What you should know is that in that version, Big Daddy does not appear in Act 3. Jump ahead then about 20 years to 1974. And Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is going to be remounted on Broadway. In other words, it's a revival. And so at this time, what Williams does is he takes his play and essentially he rewrites Act 3 by combining his initial intentions from the very first version of the play, which I'm not sure anyone other than probably Williams and Kazan and maybe only a few other people have actually ever seen or read. And the version that eventually went on Broadway in 55. And so Williams has gone on record to say that the 1974 version, the adaptation, and it's often referred to as the 1974 version, is the true definitive version of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. When you purchase this play, you always have to be very, very careful. In fact, I own both versions. I own the 55 and I own the 74. And in reading them, there really are stark differences, especially once you get into Act 2 and especially Act 3 between these. In fact, about 3 years ago, it, if you've ever watched National Theatre Live, which is a program in which in London the National Theatre puts on productions of plays, films it, and then at movie theaters around the country, these plays are the films of these plays are then shown. I was very surprised when, in that production, in which Sienna Miller played Maggie and Jack O'Connell played Brick, uh, that production did not use the 1974 adaptation. So if you've seen that one, it has its own sense of notoriety because of the staging in Act One and because of the very, very modern set but also some of the extremes in terms of the characters of Big Mama and May and how they are portrayed, as well as some of the very modern costuming. Personally, I love the very modern set. The costuming on the supporting characters troubled me a little bit. Um, the opening, which is it's not that it was controversial. It's just that it was unexpected. I understand, and given the modern design of the scenic environment, um, I guess you could say makes sense. Um, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you're curious, you might want to look up that production and read some of the news articles about it. You won't be able to find any images online about of the opening. Um, Suffice it to say, the very modern design had a very simple bedroom and had an open shower. And as you've read the play, you know that Brick is initially showering, and so Jack O'Connell is showering on stage and proceeds to continue to open the play with his dialogue as such. I'll let you continue from there. What we're going to do in this lecture is like what we've done in the previous lectures about our plays, and that is we're going to take a look at some vocabulary that you may be unfamiliar with that's used in the play. We're going to then look at the characters and discuss them a little bit. And then we're going to go through the plot structure. The second lecture that you will get for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is going to go much more in depth than what this one will be. And so let's go ahead and get started. You should know that this play is a play that I have extensively researched and directed and was my thesis play when I was completing my MA degree in 2012. So, for the University of Nebraska at Omaha, I have two graduate degrees in theater. I have an MA and I have an MFA. The MFA is the terminal degree, which I did at the University of Memphis. So, when it comes to this play, I spent 3 years researching it. I traveled to New York to do part of my research to go through the New York Public Library's theater archives, and I've directed this. So I know it well, just to give you a hint about your upcoming exam when you think about this. So let's start off by understanding that although we have taken a feminist approach at looking at all three plays this semester, or the two plays so far this semester, and that's the approach I'm going to use with this now. The feminist approach was not the one I used when I directed this and completed my thesis on it in 2012. At that time, I used a historical biographical approach as well as a moral philosophical approach. More emphasis on the moral philosophical with the historical, not so much the biographical. So I combine history and philosophy into this. So I define this play as an example of 20th century American realism. Realism, we know, is a true construct, and we've discussed realism at length in class, especially with its beginnings in Europe with Ibsen and Strindberg, Chekhov. Um, what you might not have noticed during the lectures about that was I spent a strong or gave strong consideration to American playwrights of the 20th century. And as a director and as an educator, theater educator, I have argued with other theater theorists on whether or not 20th century American realism should be its own subgenre of realism. I think it should be. So, this play opened on Broadway in 1955. And in my thesis, I said the time period, referring to 1955, is caught in the middle of McCarthyism, was fraught with social and cultural accusations of disloyalty, subversion, or even treason. Each of these represented an un American construct of society that had to be identified, uprooted, and branded for corporeal punishment. Yet, within this time frame, Williams created a scorching, character driven, ambitious, and ambiguous theatrical experience. The blistering nature of Maggie the cat, whose sheer presence exudes sexuality and ambition, dominates the ambiguity of her husband's, Brick, inconclusive sexual desires. The profanity that exudes from Big Daddy demonstrates that he has lived, while Big Mama can be characterized simply as a shrill, well meaning mother. These are intense characters battling each other as feverishly as the American government fought to cleanse the country from the Second Red Scare, the embittered battle against unpatriotic members of society. And the title of my thesis was An Existentialist Approach to the Cold War Mentality of Tennessee Williams' play Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. All of that is important for you to understand. You need to understand McCarthyism. Senator Joseph McCarthy out of Wisconsin began holding a series of hearings because he believed that there was communist subversion within the country and that subversion needed to be exposed and uprooted. The subversion, the disloyalty, the treason, all is related to this idea of communism. And and quite honestly, what McCarthy attempted to do in these hearings was he tried to get people to rat each other out. Whether they were, doing anything that was against American morality or accepted morality at that time, or patriotic ideals. Now, part of the subversion you need to understand is dealing with individual sexuality, whether that is sexual identity, uh, gender identity. Um, McCarthy believed that anything other than defining two genders and defining one accepted sexual preference was a subversive threat to society. And as such, this second Red Scare, communism, being the first Red Scare, the second Red Scare really pitted people against each other. Um, we know in our society today about the importance of civil liberties, and we know today about the importance of standing up for civil liberties for all individuals. This was a scary time in the 1950s where people really truly had to hide themselves. Within Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, you need to understand and accept two very, very important ideas or conclusions. Number one, Williams purposefully wrote an ambiguous play. Purposefully. It is ambiguous in the characters. It It is ambiguous in its ending. It's ambiguous in his intention. Okay? I have personally read Williams' papers. So if you want to argue with me on this, I'm open to doing so. Let's set up some Zooms. The second thing you need to realize, and I want to stress this very, very, very clearly, Brick's sexual desires, Brick's sexual identity, his sexual preference is completely and totally inconclusive. We cannot conclusively state one way or the other whether Brick is heterosexual or homosexual. There have been hundreds of papers written on this. There have been documentaries, there have been interviews with scholars. And I am here to tell you, whether you take a formalist approach in understanding this play, if you take a biographical approach in understanding Williams himself, who was a homosexual uh, man, whether you look at it philosophically, there is no conclusive evidence to say one way or the other what Brick's sexual preference is. And if you, as one of my students, try to conclusively say one way or the other, I'm not going to let you get away with that. And that's going to be a focus on our second lecture. Williams himself went on record to say that he has purposefully left Brick ambiguous, even with the 1974 revision to the play, and has never, Tennessee Williams himself, never went on record to clarify what Brick's sexual preference and identity is. So do not, in any way, shape, or form, try to say you know what it is or that it is this and not that. I won't allow it. You have to accept it's ambiguous and it's inconclusive. Okay? Having got that out of the way, let's start taking a look at a few terms. So I've got 2 slides here on some terms. I'm not from the South. I'm not from the Mid-South. I am originally from Nebraska. So one of the things you need to keep in mind is that terminology or the pronunciations of words that are used within this play that I'm highlighting here might be something that you're familiar with, uh, being from the Mid-South and the South. But for many people outside of this geographical region, they might not be. One of those words is lech. Uh, Williams himself, is from the South, Mid-South geographic region, and so he brings that term in. But that's a term that might not be familiar to many other individuals, and even today in 2020 and moving into 2021, that term might not be as well known as it would have been in 1954 when he first wrote the play and went on to Broadway in 55. Lech simply meaning desire. But probably the word that is used most often within the play next to lech is mendacity, and is the first term I give you. Many people, many scholars, have tried to suggest that the whole point of this play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, is focused on the theme of mendacity. And mendacity very simply means untruthfulness, instance of lying. And this idea of mendacity especially arises in the conversation between Brick and Big Daddy when they are left alone. and have their conversation. And Big Daddy questions Brick's mendacity with respect to his relationship about Skipper. And Skipper is the never seen character within this play. He is a ghost within this play in many respects. He's a ghost to Maggie. He is most definitely a ghost to Brick. In the conversation between Brick and Big Daddy, you could even say that he's a ghost to Big Daddy. But that idea of mendacity comes up over and over and over and over within this play. The next term I think that's important for you to keep in mind is diliquescence, which simply means to melt away. And then dilatory, which means to delay. Keep in mind, I've told you this in our realism lecture, that Williams is known for being very lyrical within his writings and within his dialogue, but also creating very fierce and significant female characters. Some other terms to consider is the term grotesque. I think today we look at that word grotesque and we give it a very negative connotation. We try to use that term to describe something as being very, very um, ugly, perhaps. And that's really an oversimplification. Grotesque is simply a phrase or a word that means a fantastic combination of forms. Take different things and put them together, and it's not that it's ugly. It's not that it's a different form of beautiful. It's grotesque in nature. So, uh, for example, if I were to take a Shakespearean play and combine that with an expressionism form and set it during the Rococo artistic period, I mean, I'd be putting together all these different forms that overall would create a production that's probably grotesque. It's an unbelievable, fantastic combination of different forms. Books of knowledge is used within this, and books of knowledge refers to a children's encyclopedia that was common during the time period. There's the nursery rhyme "Who Shot Cock Robin" that is used throughout, and that is an English nursery rhyme. And then there's a term that I'm going to use to describe Brick in this lecture and the next lecture that's not found within the script. But it's part of my analysis and was the foundation of my thesis. And that is phenomenological ontology. So the phrase phenomenological ontology means that an individual's understanding of the facts of the world and their consciousness of them. Okay? In other words, it's one's consciousness of their own consciousness. Phenomenological ontology is a person's consciousness of their own consciousness. In other words, this means I am completely aware of what I am aware. And that is going to be a philosophical phrase that I apply directly to Brick. Our second lecture on Cat is going to look at each of the characters and is going to define them philosophically. We won't be getting that today, but you need to keep in mind that a phenomenological ontology is important to understanding this. So let's start about the characters. In reality, the character of Margaret, Maggie, is a woman who is in her late 20s. Most often, we see that when this play is produced, that an actress in her 30s is playing the character rather than an actress in her 20s, late 20s. Maggie is described as being anxious. She has a very rapid speech. She has so much dialogue. The opening of the play, go back to the very beginning of the script. How many pages is just Maggie talking to start off with? Imagine that as a daunting task of an actress that you hold in your hand on the opening of this great play, 4 pages. She is physically attractive in her appearance. And what is, I think, fun about Maggie is that she always says whatever's on her mind. Even when she tries to give the appearance that things are better than they are, she says what's on her mind. And what is probably most significant about Maggie as this attractive, beautiful, late 20s, confident, intelligent woman is she is sexually starved. She knows it, and she's not afraid to admit it, especially to Brick, that she wants to have sex with him. She wants to love him. She wants him to physically want her. And she is starved for him to want her. Brick is also in his late 20s. Some will say early 30s. He's generally played by a man, an actor in his 30s. He is described as being very physically attractive. He's, of course, a former athlete, so he has an athletic build. He is slim. He is firm. There is a coolness to him. He is what everyone in the 1950s or 1960s would have thought of in terms of that BMOC, big man on campus. When he was the university football player, when he was in high schools, when he was a track athlete, he is that ideal. However, as we meet him, we realize that he is psychologically very tormented. He is withdrawn from his family and from society. And he has a broken ankle and uses a crutch. And he now drinks heavily to self-medicate. The play starts following what occurred with him breaking his ankle. So in terms of that exposition, we have to think about that has occurred already. And he drinks, and he drinks, and he drinks to self-medicate in order to hear the click. Big Mama is a mid-60s woman. She's bullish, often described as being large, but she may or may not be a large woman. She gets into other people's business. If you are living in her house, there's no such thing as privacy. She doesn't believe in privacy. She doesn't think privacy is a good thing. She wants to know everything that is happening at all times. She is naive, but energetic, and she works hard to try and maintain her appearance. Big Daddy is also in his mid to late 60s. He's a bullish man. He believes he's powerful. He exerts control over people. He's very proud of his wealth. He's proud of the plantation he has created in the Mississippi Delta. And you have to keep in mind that plantation is that word within this play. I think today maybe it's better to think of it as a large farm, agricultural endeavor with the large house on it and such. He's proud of his accomplishments. He does not have a warm relationship with the members of his family. But above all, he prizes Brick. And I think he prizes Brick because Brick reminds him of himself when he was young, in terms of what he sees as what should be a man in his late 20s, a man in his late 20s who's athletic, good looking, attractive, in good physical shape, and should be sexually active. Gooper then is Brick's older brother, and Gooper is in his mid 30s. Gooper is a do gooder. He is a people pleaser. He wants to be chosen as the favorite, but in reality, he's completely and totally neglected. Generally, Gooper is a strong physical type, but he does not have the athletic build or the features that Brick has. May is also in her mid 30s. She is Gooper's wife, and in the play, she's typically depicted as being 7.5 to 8 months pregnant. Her energy level is similar to Big Mama. She also wants to get into everyone's business. So she tries to style herself in many respects as a clone of Big Mama because she thinks that will help gain her favor within Big Mama and Big Daddy's view of the the wealth in the family, and that will push Gooper forward. May is very, very manipulative as a character. Two minor character roles that come into play are Reverend Tooker and Dr. Baugh. Both of these individuals are typically in their mid 40s to mid 50s. They are intended to be men of distinction because of their professions. Their professions have underlining meaning within the scope of the entire play. And as a result, they have an underlying representation within the scope of the entire play. That's for our next lecture. These two individuals are intended to be awkward. They are intended to be uncomfortable because they are thrust into situations. They are also intended to be the ears of someone who is always present and listening. Okay? Now, let's start looking at the plot. So keep in mind, exposition is referring to the backstory, the point of attack, and gives us information. So the night before the play opens, Brick has broken his ankle. What he did was he went to his old high school and he attempted to jump the hurdles at his high school track while he was drunk. And he ends up breaking his ankle, and so now he has one ankle in a cast and he's using a crutch. The rest of the family has returned with Big Daddy from the Ochsner Clinic after some medical tests, and it's Big Daddy's 65th birthday. Brick and Maggie, although they are sharing a room and have a room, they no longer have a sexual relationship with each other. Maggie desperately wants one. She desperately wants that connection with Brick. Brick's torment prevents him from having that. Brick's best friend, Skipper, who he had played football with in college and professionally and had been a commentator on the radio or television, has died. And Brick now drinks to self-medicate until he hears the click. The click that essentially turns off the thinking and the consciousness within himself. So it's almost as if he's conscious of the fact that he needs to turn off his consciousness, that phenomenological ontology. Big Daddy, and this is all before the play begins, has been diagnosed with cancer. But he and Big Mama don't know the truth. Maggie knows it. Gooper knows it. May knows it. Brick learns about it very early on. But you have to keep in mind, he didn't know because, again, he was drunk and he was out on his high school track and he was doing the hurdles. Now, this is a late point of attack. The entire play takes place within less than a day. It is a climactic play. It is not episodic. This play also meets the unities. It's one place, one time, and truly one theme. Um, there are not subplots here. So when we were talking about the unities earlier in the semester, some of you commented that you would find a play that stuck to the unities as boring. And I said, well, just wait till we get to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. This play sticks to the unities. And from the opening of the play until the point in which we get to the climax, that point of recognition and reversal, very little time has transpired. Okay? So that's why we have a late point of attack and why we say that this is climactic. Now, in terms of the inciting incident, personally, I see several different instances that can be construed as the inciting incident within this. Number one, we have Maggie telling Brick that Big Daddy has cancer, and so far everyone has kept this from him and Big Mama. That could be an inciting incident to what is setting up this story. Number two is Maggie saying Skipper's name. Keep in mind that when the play opens, Maggie has just come in from outside. She's got to change her dress because of Gooper and May's children have, spilled buttered biscuits all over her. And so she's got to change. Brick is in the shower, and he comes out of the shower. And in reality, he hasn't yet begun drinking. So perhaps what instigates all of the issues that come up within this play is Maggie saying Skipper's name. Or it could be Brick telling Maggie to take a lover. He recognizes that she wants him, that she wants to make love, she wants to have sex with him, that she's sexually starved. And he tells her, all right, go ahead, take a lover. You won't get any opposition from me if you do that. And that idea of taking a lover challenges Maggie because, well, one, she's married to Brick, and he's not talking about ending their marriage. But it also registers in her mind what she attempted to do with Skipper, which is, of course, unveiled, comes to light later in the play. If we ultimately end up deciding that the play is about mendacity, as many scholars suggest, then concluding that number one is the true inciting incident, the revelation of the first line of the play, will set into motion that more revelations will come, and that unearthing or speaking the truth in a family that lives within lies forces all of the succeeding actions. So I think we have to understand the idea of mendacity to truly understand this. And if this is a play about untruthfulness, if this is a play about mendacity, then the first lie has to be the inciting incident. because everything is going to come from there. Now, in terms of rising action, number one, Brick, we know Brick drinks to forget. He wants to turn off his brain. He wants to turn off his consciousness. He's waiting for the click. Number two, Maggie wants a real, intimate, loving relationship with Brick. She doesn't want a marriage that's only on paper. She doesn't want what Gooper or May have. She doesn't necessarily want what Big Daddy and Big Mama have. But she definitely wants something with Brick. Maggie mentions Skipper's name as part of the rising action, and that truly begins to fuel what happens with Brick. That begins to fuel his drinking. Brick tells Maggie to take a lover. That also adds obstacles and complications to their argument. Keep in mind, in terms of Act One, while we hear outside noises and things, and maybe we get Big Mama barging in, Act One is all about Brick and Maggie. All about Brick and Maggie. And they're one-upping each other. You know, Brick wants to forget, so he drinks. Maggie wants him to be a real husband to her. She mentions Skipper's name to try and get him to forget about that and to look at her. So he one-ups it by saying, no, you take a lover. Big Mama, of course, is excited that Big Daddy will be fine because they've all come back from the Ochsner Clinic, and as far as she knows, there's nothing wrong with Big Daddy with these tests. And ultimately, what ends up happening is everyone ends up in Brick and Maggie's room. Okay, so I want you to imagine this. Imagine you are your late 20s and married. Okay, and you are from a wealthy family where everyone still lives under one roof. That in your marriage, that there is a physical disconnect, there is an emotional disconnect, there is a psychological disconnect between you and your spouse. Your spouse is an alcoholic, and you have just had one of the most intense arguments and conversations. And keep in mind, again, you're only in your late 20s. And all of a sudden, to complicate it, everyone comes into your damn room. What should have been your private sanctuary. But keep in mind, as far as Big Mom is concerned, and ultimately May, sister woman, there's no such thing as privacy. Because Gooper and May constantly eavesdrop on Brick and Maggie nightly. And they report this to Big Mama. I find it interesting that you have Gooper and May, mid-30s. I've already had 5 children. Number 6 is on the way. And yet somehow have the time to listen in to eavesdrop on Brick and Maggie nightly to see whether or not they're having sex. I find humor in that. I think it's kind of funny. So we get to the crisis, the action that of the play that takes an important, critical turn of confrontation, and this is in Act 2. Big Daddy and Brick have a full-on confrontation, and they admit that they never truly talked to each other. And Big Daddy comes straight out and tells Brick his drinking began with Skipper's death. That up until that point, Brick was fine. And Brick counters. He says that he had a real, true friendship with Skipper that others have named dirty. Now, I want you to think about that. Because so much of what people try to hinge on Brick's sexuality is this relationship between Brick and Skipper and what we have come to learn about it. And we know, I think we can say fairly clearly that Skipper is most definitely was questioning in terms of his identity. He didn't completely know. And because Skipper questioned and intimated things to Brick, that may have caused Brick to question. Skipper, however, definitely does question. But what Brick says, and Brick says this in his own words, is that he had a real, true friendship with Skipper. And because he was a man who had a real, true friendship with Skipper, other people said that was wrong, that that was dirty. Now, again, this goes back to where we started this lecture. You have to think about the mid 1950s and McCarthyism and the idea that there is a subversive nature in society that has to be uprooted, cast out, punished. You have to keep in mind this is a time period in which they thought you could medically cure sexual preference. Today, we don't look at same gendered identity individuals having strong, beautiful, wonderful friendships with each other as being something dirty. We think that's crazy, that's absurd. But you have to look at this through the lens of the 50s, philosophically, historically. You have to keep in mind that men were expected to play men's roles in society, what they deemed as male roles in society, within the home, within families. Women were expected to play their roles. You could have friendships, but those friendships still had to be defined within the roles. For Brick and Skipper, they had a real, true friendship. So the climax, the recognition and reversal, the most significant process. The challenge here is one that requires us to determine who experiences recognition and reversal. Does Maggie experience it? Does Big Daddy experience it? Or does Brick? If we define it occurring earlier than in most plays, then it could be when Big Daddy learns, he recognizes and reverses his outlook that he has cancer. If we define it occurring later in the play, it could be when Maggie recognizes and reverses her position within the family, announcing she is pregnant in order to save Brick's standing. So that's really late in the play. Here's the question. What do you think? This, I think, is part of the beauty of the ambiguity within this play. Is that we could truly define two different climax points depending upon the perspective. We can recognize that Big Daddy has recognition and reversal. We can see that Maggie has recognition and reversal. And if we look hard enough, we could probably even define a recognition and reversal point for Brick. I don't think there is one, but if you want to look for it, you might be able to. So that question comes down to you. What do you think? These three are the only individuals possible for experiencing recognition and reversal. Where do you think the climax occurs? So that brings us to the denouement, the falling action, the winding down of the play. Going with the early climax possibility, the rest of the play becomes about telling Big Mama the truth and the resulting action that follows from that. So if the early climax, Big Daddy recognizes and reverses his position with respect to his cancer diagnosis, there's a lot of action that occurs after that. If we go with the later climax, the announcement by Big Daddy that, yes, Maggie is with child and he wants his lawyer the next day, that's the denouement. Personally, I want you to make a decision what you think the climax is. I know what I internally, philosophically, believe to be the climax. I suspect if you look at the denouement, you should be able to guess what I think is the climax. Because look at what happens in the winding down. What do you think is more important here? The action that follows Big Mama and the truth? Or the action of after Maggie says, I'm pregnant? And it's Brick's father. That should give you a hint what I think the climax is. So we get to the resolution. The end of the story. The conflicts are resolved. Regardless of what you think the ultimate climax of the story is, the story ends with Maggie taking a drunk Brick to bed with the intention that she will get pregnant, with the intention that she will reestablish her sexual relationship with her husband, and with the intention that she will cement not hers, but their position in the family. So it doesn't matter what you think is the ultimate climax of this. I'm gonna guess all of us can agree. We think it's with Maggie. The ending is the same. The ending of the story is the same. And again, I want you to keep in mind what Williams and Elliot Kazan put on stage in '55 and ultimately became the film with Newman and Taylor had a completely different Act 3 than what Williams adapted and rewrote and was put on stage in 1974. Big Daddy is in Act 3 now. He wasn't before. So, with that, we are at the end of our first lecture on Cat on a Tin Roof. I hope it gives you some things to consider and to think about. And I will look forward to talking to you guys in our next lecture about the play. Take care.